So I'm delighted that all of you are in the room, and those of you joining us virtually or remotely are able to join us in the exploration on what it takes to deliver sustainable forest management in fragile ecosystems in partnership with Indigenous peoples and local communities. I am David Gans. I'm the Executive Director of RECOF, not to be confused with REFECOF. RECOF is a silent C at the end. At RECOF, we believe in a future where people live equitably and sustainably in and besides healthy, resilient forests. We take a long-term landscape-based and inclusive approach to support local communities in securing their land and resource rights, stop deforestation, find alternative livelihoods, and foster gender equality. Our entry point for all of this is community forestry. We hope you have an interest in this. Again, for those in the back, please come forward as you join us. We're trying to have a much more intimate feel for this event. In terms of our work, we work throughout Asia Pacific in partnership with forest communities, civil society, multilateral institutions, governments, private sector, and others. In fact, partnerships is really the foundation of our work, and that's what we are here to profile this afternoon with all of you. I'm going to talk a bit about our approach to community forestry and partnerships in a minute, but first I would like to tell you more about this session and what we plan to do this afternoon. First, we will hear from our RECOF co-host for this session, Basanta Shrestha. He's the Director of Strategic Cooperation at the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, otherwise known as ICIMOD, and Sam Kamambwa, Executive Director at the Aberdeen Rifts Conservation Society, also known as ARCOS. So we have three co-session leads, RECOF, ARCOS, and ICIMOD, and I would like to thank my co-leads for their participation over the last several months in generating this panel. Next, we will participate in an interactive exercise to learn about the challenge that you all face in your respective countries and what you think are the best solutions. So we hope you will take part in this interactive exercise. Lastly, we're going to hear from our panelists about their research and their experiences and recommendations for ways forward. We currently have two of them here. Hopefully, our colleague from the GCF, Mark, will be joining shortly, and some of our panelists will be joining online. The panel discussion will be moderated by Nathalie Faure, Senior Program Officer of Governance, Institutions, and Conflict Transformation at RECOF. So thank you, Nathalie, for your participation and moderation. We saw a very excellent example of facilitation in the next session, and we have high hopes that Nathalie can engage you all in a similar energetic fashion. Before I pass the floor to one of my co-hosts, I would like to take the opportunity for our audience here in Seoul and our remote audiences to participate in both the interactive exercise as well as the panel discussion. So you will have opportunities to both go online and take an opinion on Mentimeter, but also to take the floor using the microphones or the chat box for the online participants. And before I pass the floor to the other co-hosts, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the models and opportunities for partnership with Indigenous and local communities from across the Asia-Pacific region. And at RECOF, we work with thousands of communities, both considered local communities and Indigenous communities. Many countries in the Asia-Pacific are practicing what we call community forestry, and through community forestry, they are unleashing the potential of forest communities to sustainably manage forests and other ecosystems, particularly fragile ecosystems and areas of very rich biodiversity. The models of community forestry applied in the Asia-Pacific region are highly diverse to accommodate the different forms of governance, geographies, and certainly cultures. These tested models can be integrated into a wider jurisdictional level approach, not only in the Asia Pacific, but these jurisdictional level approaches can be used around the world. And today, across 16 countries in the Asia Pacific region for which data is available, we have 185 million hectares of forest land that are currently managed under some form of community forestry. That means that at least 1/3 of the forested land in those 16 countries are indeed managed by communities today. And community forestry is currently growing. Many countries have set targets to grow their approaches with community forestry or social forestry. In Southeast Asia alone, the amount of forests managed by communities has doubled since 2020 and is expected to triple in the next decade by 2030. And this growth highlights the potential of sustainable forest management in partnership with indigenous peoples and local communities, and the relevance of our discussion and panel today. I would now like to pass the floor to my co-host, Sam, Executive Director at ARCOS, and then after that, Sam will set the stage for our conversation today. Over to you, Sam. I hope the video will play. Otherwise, I will turn things over to our other co-host, if our organizers could please share the video of Sam or our colleagues at EasyMode.
Hi, David. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Wonderful.
Okay, good to see you, David.
Wonderful.
Shall I go first? And I also got a message that Sam is not joined virtually, so I was asked to go first.
Okay.
Is that all right with the organizers?
So Basanta Shrestha, please, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. It's a pleasure to hear you. Unfortunately, I have not been able to make it to Korea, but here I am joining virtually. At the outset, we are very happy to join RECOFT and ARCOS to co-host this very important session. As David has explained, today we have gathered here to celebrate the 15th World Forestry Congress, and I would like to thank the host government Korea and the leadership of FAO for organizing this flagship event. In this session, I would like to highlight the significance of the symbiotic relationship between mountain indigenous community and forest in the context of one of the most magnificent yet most challenging landscape and the most fragile landscape, the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. As you know, the Hindu Kush Himalayan region extends over 3,500 kilometers from east to west, from Afghanistan in the west to Myanmar in the east, crossing over Pakistan, India, China, Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh. As the source of 10 major river basin system, the SKS provides essential natural endowment, natural resources, especially water and biodiversity, to nearly 2 billion people, a fourth of humanity indeed. Forest cover, Forests in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region cover around 1/4 of the region. Forests are also referred as the lungs of the planet. They are an integral part of the transboundary landscape, connecting numerous ecosystems and conserving biodiversity, sustaining livelihoods, providing timber and other resources, and guarding against the natural disasters such as landslides, floods, rockfalls, and avalanches. The health and the vitality of the many forests ecosystems are already affected by climatic as well as land use changes. While the latter may outweigh the former, but with the accelerating climate change adds a challenging dimension to future forest management. as greenhouse gas and carbon sequestration are among the key functions that the fast degrading mountain forest must perform. The paramount role of a forest in adapting to and mitigating the impact of climate change has become a global concern. Yet forest ecosystem continue to degrade and fragment, keeping the local community at the very center stage. ICIMOR, through various programs, developing integrated and innovative tools and approaches, and engage with network of partners to reverse that trend and preserve the forest of the SKS. Given the highlight of this partnership with the indigenous and local community, I would like to take this opportunity to share 3 intriguing examples exemplifying the access and benefit sharing interdependency of the mountain indigenous community and the local people with forest. Let me start with the first one. The first is rather the popular one in Nepal's community forest, a story of a good governance. About 4 decades ago, community forest management was initiated by government of Nepal to mitigate increasing deforestation and forest degradation to address the negative impact on rural livelihoods. The community forest management is one of the successful stories of the green economy sectors in Nepal. Nepal has become the first country to implement the concept of community forest use effectively by assembling its grassroots forces, local communities, especially focusing on the rural women. Thus, Nepal has been internationally recognized as a country, and we take pride with the most progressive policy and legislation on the community forestry and exemplary practices across the different member countries. The key message here is a tree is not a project, tree is life. Having said this, second example is I would like to share is on a REDD+, or reducing emission from deforestation and the forest degradation. ICIMOR's 2 decades of implementation of REDD+ measures have contributed to mitigate climate change and conserve forests in the Hindu-Kush Himalayan region, particularly in our member countries, Bhutan, India, Myanmar, and Nepal, promoting result-based management of forest resources. Collaborating with a very diverse range of partners, we have supported to build capacity, provide technical backstopping, set up a regional REDD learning platform, and develop methods for measurement, reporting, and verification of forest carbon. Our key strength has been to develop science-based innovative approaches for the implementation of the REDD+, considering the co-benefits that led to a sustained conservation and the development in the SKS region. ICIMOR's embraced a community-based approach, again, working very closely with a forest user group that mainstreams the participation of local communities, indigenous communities, especially women. The key message here is our solutions lies in nature, working very closely with the local community and putting them in a very much in a spotlight. Let me go to a third example, which is more progressive in nature and which is a recent community-based carbon forestry. The SKS region has the potential to generate carbon credits through sustainable forest management. Carbon financing provides an opportunity for replication and upscaling of successful interventions and reinforces UN decade of ecosystem restoration. And also in the mountain context, this year being a UN decade of international year of sustainable mountain development, it underscores also the kind of spotlight in the SKS region. ICIMOR is facilitating a pilot community-based carbon forestry project aimed at bringing about transformative change in the forestry landscape of the Hindu-Kush Himalayan region through result-based finance as a nature-based solution. In partnership with the government of Nepal, multinational companies, NGOs, and local community, the community-based carbon forestry project aims to enhance capacity of forest sinks and mitigate forest emission while contributing to the local livelihoods and biodiversity conservation efforts. The pilot is envisaged to be replicated in other countries of the SKS to meet the financing needs of afforestation, reforestation, and revegetation of community-led forest user group and target mountain communities in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. The key message here is again securing forest for the future benefiting the local community through incentive-based payment mechanism. And we hope that this sort of a model would provide adequate kind of a financing to bring transformative change to a local people and the indigenous community. Last but not least, forest management will have to be further sensitive to the biodiversity and the climate needs, keeping the local community in a very central stage. Partnership with local community and indigenous people would be a central stage while exploiting latest development in science, innovation, management practices, and the urgent action must be directed towards transformation benefit to these communities. Again, at the end, I just would like to re-emphasize that this year being the International Year of Sustainable Mountain Development 2022, through this World Forestry Congress platform, we would like to also promote the mountain voices of indigenous people and the local community to the international stage and bring this very important dimension of a partnership. ICIMOD is very delighted to be a part of this organizing this session and wishing all of you a very successful deliberation. Thank you very much for your attention. I am supposed to, I just would like to revert back to our organizers. I am supposed to introduce Natalia, but I understand that whether if Sam has joined in, perhaps Sam could come in and then I will introduce at a later stage Natalia, who would be moderating our panel discussion. Back to you, David, or anyone. Or if Sam is around.
I think for the sake of time, we need to move to our next participatory exercise with Mentimeter. So Basanta, if you don't mind to introduce Natalie, we will proceed with the interactive portion of our session.
Thank you, David. It's my pleasure to introduce Natalia Faure, who is a legal advisor with 15 years of experience in forest governance, communities' rights and policy reform in Africa and Southeast Asia. She worked with various non-governmental organizations and UN institutions on human rights and environmental issues. She currently works at RECOFT, where she supports civil society organizations and engages with policymakers to establish more inclusive decision-making processes on forest. Her current research and area of interest include customary tenure recognition in the Mekong region and the role of civil society in a forest governance. Over to you, Natalia.
Thank you very much, Basanta. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning for those of you joining us online, and good evening, perhaps. I'm delighted to be your moderator today. So before we go on to the panel discussion, we have a very exciting panel to propose to you this afternoon. I would like to actually involve you in the discussion and to have an interactive activity with you. We've planned a Mentimeter survey, so I'll ask our organizers if they could put the survey up. With a few questions going to you, so we'd like to learn a little bit more about you, where you're from, and your ideas about how to involve local communities and indigenous people in the dialogues we're talking about. So please join us with the Mentimeter audience survey. I think everybody's got a phone, so you can use your phone. There are multiple ways in which you can access the live survey. You can visit the website you have the direct URL that is appearing here on the screen, and I believe that should be shared in the chat box for those of you joining online. And you can also use the QR code with your phone to be taken directly to the website. There will be a code that you need to enter that's also displayed on the screen. Okay, so for the first question, we would love to hear about just a simple question to start us off. Where are you from? So you can pick one of the regions: North America, Latin America, Europe, Africa, Asia, and Australia. I'll give you a few seconds for you to be able to log in. Okay, sure. Could we get the previous screen to have access to the QR code, please, so people can log in? Is it working on yours? So could I get some IT support? I think we are having some technical challenge for people to log into the Mentimeter. Although David, to my right, is managing, so maybe he's got VIP access. David will know where you're from. You might be the only person to respond.
I'm the only one voting at the moment, but I think you should be getting to the first screen, which is where are you from? It starts with North America, Latin America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia.
Yeah, but it does say that the voting is closed down there.
Oh, yes.
It says voting is closed. So.
Okay, I'm seeing a countdown, which means it's good news, and we're getting some answers in. And for now, Asia is a big winner, but oh, this is interesting. It's like watching a game with like live results. 21 from Asia. It's okay. We'll just give a few more seconds for everybody to enter their responses.
And we will count the number of people in the room so we know if you're not answering the poll. Just kidding. It comes with the chocolate from Mark. You did bring the chocolate, right, Mark?
I did.
Okay. Okay, there's 20 seconds left. So if you haven't done the poll, this is the test run to get to the next question.
And Asia is gaining grounds.
Three, two, one, take off.
Okay, so yes, the big majority from you, from Asia, and then Europe, Latin America, North America, and one person from Australia. Great, thanks for participating, but this is not it. So now you're in the Mentimeter. We have a series of more substantial questions for you. So the next one will be, what are the major challenges that indigenous peoples and local communities in your region face to participate effectively in sustainable forest and land management? We have 6 possible answers: mosaic land use with fragmented forest, limited investment and access to technology, 3, weak governance and poor extension support, 4, a lack of landscape management approaches, 5, local people have diminishing interest in managing forest landscapes and increasing interest in moving to cities for jobs, and 6, all of the above. Please put your votes in. You have about half a minute to respond to this one. Okay, we're already starting to see a little bit of a trend with 2 answers that around weak governance and local people that have diminishing interest in managing forest landscapes because they're moving to cities for jobs. That seem to come out of the lot. Please continue voting. You have about 7 seconds left. Okay, so the main reason, the main challenge would be weak governance and poor extension support, and then followed by, as I said, people moving to cities for jobs. Okay, our third question. This is a very interesting one. What are the 3 top drivers of deforestation in your region? So you're asked to choose 3 of them for these questions. So small-scale illegal logging. The second one is encroachment by human settlements. Third, large-scale commercial logging and development projects. The fourth is agricultural expansion. The fifth, fuel wood consumption. And finally, construction of roads and other infrastructure. So far, we have quite a lot of votes going to agricultural expansion and large-scale commercial logging and development projects. Also construction of roads, so it's mostly around infrastructure, development projects, logging, agriculture. Encroachment by human settlements as well, it seems quite important. Less so for fuel wood consumption. Please continue to vote. We have a few seconds left. That's certainly representing the trend and indeed the top drivers of deforestation worldwide, with agricultural expansion being definitely one of the top drivers. Voting is closed, so agricultural expansion is the first driver you picked, followed by construction of roads and infrastructure and large-scale commercial logging and other projects. All right, we have one more question to throw at you, which is now around forest degradation. So we'd love to know what you think are the 3 top causes of forest degradation in your region. So the proposed answers are forest fires, invasive species, illegal timber logging, agricultural encroachment, unmanaged grazing, expanding settlements and urbanization, and soil erosion and landslides. Please continue voting. We have a bit of a trend coming out now.
I have to look at the big screen because my eyes are not.
Yes, so mostly expanding settlement and urbanization is the main one that you've mentioned, followed by forest fires and agriculture encroachment. Thanks very much. This is quite an interactive session. I hope that you're also enjoying just seeing the results from everybody from different regions in the world. We have a couple of more questions for you, so please stay connected. The next one will be, now we've looked at the drivers of both deforestation and degradation, or if we can go back to the Mentimeter, that would be fantastic. I think we have a couple of more questions coming up.
It's here.
So if you have it online, what are the top 3 ways to restore degraded forest landscapes? And you can choose between mobilize climate finance for carbon sequestration from the private sector, put forest management as a priority in the national development agenda, incentivize local communities and forest-dependent populations, create and empower community-based forest management units, and provide fast-growing tree species that restore nutrients to the soil. So the top 3 ways to restore degraded forest landscapes. It might be for some perhaps a bit of a technical question, but please do vote and put in your ideas in there. So some of the best ways and the trends that's coming out, we are glad to hear in this session, is to incentivize local communities and forest-dependent population. We'll also be talking about that and about partnerships with forest communities today, but also empower community-based forest management units and putting forest management as a priority in the development agenda. Okay, we have one last question for you. And this one is going to be related directly to opportunities for indigenous people. So what would be the best, according to you, the best opportunity for indigenous people to contribute to landscape restoration? We have 3 answers: to link forest-dependent indigenous communities with climate finance, to ensure socially inclusive planning, implementation, and monitoring processes for forestry activities, or to design landscape-level programs that integrate water, agriculture, forest, and energy. Okay, you have a few more seconds to vote. It seems that so far the best opportunity that you have voted for, is to ensure socially inclusive planning, implementation, and monitoring processes for forestry activities. So for indigenous people to be involved in those so that they can better contribute to landscape restoration. Great, thank you very much for your, we can actually, please. Yes, thanks very much for your interactive participation to the Mentimeter. I think that's a great introduction to our session. And we will now move on to the panel discussion. So we have a really great set of panelists here with us today, both here present in Seoul and also online. So they will present the set of practitioners and academists that have done some research, and they will present today the results of their research, their findings, but also share with you their experiences. I'd like to first present Grace Wong. Grace is an associate professor at the Research Institute for Humanity and Nature in Kyoto, and a senior researcher at the Stockholm Resilience Center. Grace is a natural resource economist. Over the past 2 decades, her research has focused on assessing social, economic, and ecological trade-offs in changing tropical environments, looking at the interface of development and conservation processes. Grace has extensive work experience in Southeast Asia and Latin America, and more recently in Sub-Saharan Africa. And her current research is on the politics and governance of forest and ecosystem services in social ecological systems, with a particular focus on issues of power, gender, and equity. So Grace will be presenting a study on the development of peatland restoration and livelihood improvement model, on the making of resource frontier spaces in the Congo Basin and Southeast Asia, with a critical analysis of narratives, actors, and drivers in the scientific literature. Over to you, Grace, for your presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much to Recoft, to Arcos, and to Isimot for organizing this session. Very pleased to be here and also to share some of our research findings. This is a small piece of work as part of a broader project called Fair Frontiers, which is being funded and led by the Research Institute for Humanity and Nature. Next slide, please. So we are looking at the making of what we called resource frontier spaces in the Congo Basin and Southeast Asia. As part of the project, we are looking at some of the social and ecological changes as part of what is the development process in these frontier regions. And we know that developed frontier regions or frontiers have long excited the imaginations since colonial times, where frontiers are always seen as areas with vast resources and areas that have as full of potential for development and for extraction. And there are numerous narratives around frontiers that have both influenced science and policies over the past decades. Next, please. So often development in frontiers are imbued with many win-win narratives. There is a win for development, a win for generating economic growth, as well as win for poverty reduction, bringing progress to rural populations and creating agrarian modernization and so on. You can go click for the next couple points. Yes. And so Alma Singh, in her paper in 2005, also argued that as these frontier regions are changing very quickly, no one can be surprised to find that these processes are destructive of both forests and indigenous cultures. So as part of this project, we wanted to examine how science or basically scientific literature may have played a role in putting forward particular knowledge systems and particular understandings of frontiers and development in frontiers. And we focus our work in the Congo Basin and Southeast Asia, which is the areas for our research, for our project research. Next slide, please. So there are lots of findings, and what I like to talk about very quickly in my few minutes is what are some of the dominant narratives that are coming out from our work. We find that even though frontier regions have changed over past decades, even today's dynamics continue to rely very much on really outdated narratives of frontiers as being unproductive areas. So as idle lands that are waiting to be exploited or to be developed. So as one government officer said in Malaysia, as part of the Anderson paper, why would you leave your land empty if it can produce? And this is with regards to the discussion around development and expansion of oil palm plantation. So while smallholders and indigenous peoples are often considered as subjects for driving agrarian modernization or for enabling capitalist development, they are also often thought of as needing development themselves. They are portrayed often as in need of changing their collective mindset in order to be part of the development agenda, to kind of be part of the modern world. So we find that some of these political visions of development and growth are rather narrow, and they are often reinforced throughout time with very selected evidence and selected research also. And so we find that this is also replicated in more recent climate change and green economy movements. Next, please. So what we just would like to call, and this is a short, a very small snapshot of a much wider research, and I believe the paper is also available. But what we'd like to call for from part of this work is a research and policy agenda that provides space for different types of knowledge systems beyond the northern and western ways of thinking about development to be a bit more inclusive for different types of governance practices, the type that our hosts were talking about in the beginning, and also to consider different values of what development is. And development is not just the same type of similar narrow ways of moving an economy forward. So we would like to challenge both research and also the policy agenda to be more inclusive and to look at more equitable ways of development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Grace. That was indeed a very clear and well-formed message about the call to change some of that narrative. So you've looked into narratives around frontiers and the way that those might be outdated and not including the knowledge management systems that indigenous peoples and local communities have. And that narrative that's turned around the need for production, so having productive land that's the center of the focus. I'd now like to pass on to our second panelist who's here with us today, Mr. Mark Christoph Dumas Johansen. So Mark is an agriculture and food security specialist at the Green Climate Fund. He leads and coordinates the review of agriculture, food security, food systems, food loss and waste, and related natural resource projects. He worked as a forest and land use specialist with the Green Climate Fund on REDD+ result-based payments and ecosystem projects. Mark has work experience with the Food and Agriculture Organization, both based in the headquarters in Rome and at the sub-regional office in Zimbabwe, and focusing on forest, climate change, and climate finance. He has started his career in Cambodia and Vietnam, working for local NGO on agricultural development and resilient farming systems, and with the World Agroforestry Center. So Mark, you will be talking to us today about biodiversity beyond borders, safeguarding the future of the Mayombo ecoregion of Eastern and Southern Africa. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Natalie. And first of all, let me really apologize for being a little bit late for this session today. Hopefully I can make up with a shorter and more entertaining few minutes from my side. Really, this is an honor to be with you all today, and thank you so much, dear colleagues, for inviting me today. This paper that I've submitted is a personal contribution that I did together with a very good friend and former colleague from CIFOR, Davison Gumbo, who is focusing on the Mayombo woodlands of Southern Africa. And together we thought that it would be really interesting to submit this idea of how we can use biodiversity as a key framework for improve our management of natural resources with local communities at the driving seat. So the paper that I believe you all have access to really seeks to look at, first of all, why is biodiversity important and why is that important for local communities? So maybe taking a step back, the Convention on Biological Diversity, as you probably know, had from 2011 to 2020 the strategic plan for biodiversity. The next steps for that is the global biodiversity framework, which is currently being developed as we speak. And later this year, at the second part of the CBD COP, this will be finalized. But what we have already on the table is a draft version, which is, if you will, actually translated directly, it's basically a theory of change, to say it very simply. We decided to look at what would that look like for a regional ecosystem or an ecoregion. So we tried to translate that global framework into something that could look important and tangible for a regional aspect. And we decided to do that for the Mayombo ecoregion because it's, number one, a biodiversity hotspot area, and number two, it's the safety net for millions of rural poor communities across Southern Africa. And the two are really interlinked and really depend upon one another for survival and for management and for sustainable use. So if you look at the current stage of the woodlands, looking at the National Biodiversity strategy and action plans submitted by the different countries in the Myombo ecoregion. They have all identified what are some of the key drivers of degradation and deforestation. In particular, illegal logging, charcoal production, agricultural expansion, all those key drivers we saw listed here before are also very present there. At the same time, it also, of course, mentioned being biodiversity plans, also highlighted the key importance of maintaining biodiversity and really with local communities being at the center of that management. So what we thought of then doing is to then look at that global framework, which I mentioned goes from today up to 2050 and really sets very clear milestones and targets for how to achieve urgent action for biodiversity. And it's a very interesting exercise because it really outlines what needs to happen today, tomorrow, all the way up to 2050 if we are to really do something about this. And it goes beyond biodiversity. The global framework for biodiversity also looks at linking up with the two other Rio Conventions, the UNFCCC and the UNCCD. They are all interlinked, and the framework really seeks to look at that. And across all targets, local communities are really at the forefront because it's looking at preserving biodiversity and keeping those support services for local communities for food security and ES services. So what we then did was we used the global framework and we translated that into the Myombo biodiversity framework, where we try to analyze different numbers based on the current status of the woodlands, thinking what could potentially happen in the future. Of course, this is all just food for thought, but those different numbers you will see listed in the paper, they are just some suggestions of what could be actions to take and milestones to reach, and then that could be translated into concrete projects, into concrete investments. And what we were hoping to do with the framework was to also see how could that regional framework actually be translated into investment plans driven by the communities, the governments, and the different stakeholders across this ecoregion. That really by working together and strengthening collaboration across the region, there's a really unique moment to really move forward. And this is an exercise I believe we can use, of course, at the national level, but in particular, these regional ecosystems, cross-country ecosystems and regions are very interesting to look at, I believe. And this framework could come in very, very handy there. So what we really hope is that someone would be interested in this to pick this up, that the governments, the communities, the stakeholders, donors could look at this framework and see, okay, here's a great idea for actually creating a project or program right away. The numbers are there, as I mentioned. They are just an inspiration for numbers, but you could decide to be more ambitious, to go in different directions. But it's a valid exercise, I believe, and I'll be very interested to discuss this further with you afterwards. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mark, for concise and to the points about the regional framework that you developed for the Myombo, this very important ecoregion. You mentioned that your research is available online. I wonder if you can just say where people might be able to have access to it?
Thank you, Natalie. Yes, sorry, I thought it would be online on the Congress website. I'm not sure how that, where exactly on the website it is, but hopefully it's there somewhere. Otherwise, I'll be very happy to share it, of course, with everyone.
Great, that sounds really good. Thank you. Okay, so we now would love to hear from our third speaker today. I'm very happy to introduce Hae-Yoon Seo, who's with us today, and she is a research fellow at the National Institute of Forest Science. At the Division of Global Forestry, her research focuses on the alignment of forestry with the Sustainable Development Goals, the role of forests in nature-based solutions, and the official development assistance, ODA, in the forestry sector. Currently, she's involved in a peatland restoration project in Indonesia with CIFOR, aiming to enhance the local community's income in Perigi village by developing sustainable methods to support their livelihood and maintain restored peatlands. And that is exactly what Hye-Yoon will be talking to us about today. Hye-Yoon, over to you.
Thank you, Natalie. It's an honor to have an opportunity to share our ODA experience with distinguished guests and experts today. I'll introduce our team's research project to develop a model for the local communities to support their livelihood sustainably. Next slide, please. I'll show our overall plan, share our progress in research, and explain what we expect from the project. Next slide, please. The objectives of the project is to restore peatlands and develop a sustainable and livelihood improvement model for the local communities. Under collaboration with CIFOR, the project is planned for 5 years. We began with the preparatory stage by selecting the site, researching the suitable species based on the literature review, and interviewing the peatland farmers. Now we're in the second year, ready for tree plantations. As we progress, we are focused on reforestation, the development of the model, and carbon sequestration. Next slide, please. Indonesia has the third largest area of peatlands in the world. However, it has 2 million hectares of degraded 2 million hectares of degraded peatlands, and only about 7% of the natural peat swamp forests remain in Sumatra and Kalimantan. As you see in the picture, you can tell the difference between the natural peat swamp forests, peatland fire, and the degraded peatlands. For the site, we looked into peatlands in South Sumatra and in the Bergi village. And actually, the Bergi has an area of more than 1,000 hectares of degraded peatlands and already has several forest fires in the past. The area is recovering but still prone to fire. After consultations with CIFOR, we selected on 10 hectares of research site in the village. Next slide, please. Based on the literature review and preference surveys, we have narrowed down the species for trees, crops, and fish. And for these three species, Niapulung and Bongamia, it's also known as Malabari, they actually have high growth rate in the peat soil, and the oil extracted from these trees can be used as sources for cosmetics, fertilizer, and medicine. Crops, among many, pineapples are one of them, and the locals' preferences also include jackfruit, mango, and rice. Catfish is likely to be one that's gonna be used for our aquaculture. Next slide, please. Last year, we conducted a survey to peatland farmers in Bergi on the perception of agro-silver fishery, and 85% of the respondents agreed with the new model. Yet, there were some concerns about the additional cost, need for maintenance, and lack of technology and skills. The Indonesian government officially banned slash and burn practices so the farmers had to find different means to support their living. Most of them rely on rice cultivation, fishing, and vegetable farming. But they are dissatisfied with the low productivity due to natural disasters such as fires and flooding, followed by low maintenance and lack of technology. From this inspection, we realized the farmers need training and capacity building for sustainable peatland management, in addition to support for the cultivation. Next slide, please. The plan describes how crops and trees will be allocated in the area surrounded by the canals. The picture below is Niapulung tree planted next to canal, and other is crops on the peatlands. We plan to continue accommodating with the local Finland farmers' preferences for the model. Our primary goal does not end in simple restoring the peatlands, but also in supporting the farmers in Berge to adopt agro-silver fishery to maintain a sustainable practice for their livelihood. Although the research area is only 10 hectares, after successful implementation, we expect the practice to be widely applied to other communities, regions, and even nationwide. Thank you so much for attention.
Thank you very much, Hae-Yoon, and congratulations for the research, which seems to be showing quite a high willingness of farmers to adopt agro-silvo fisheries practices with quite a good potential for replication in other communities and nationwide, potentially, to ensure peatland communities are sustainable. Last but not least, I'm very happy to introduce our last speaker, Chai Sankamukun, who is Flourish Project Field Coordinator at Recoft. He's with us today. And he works closely with local communities in Lao PDR, such as communities working with teak, charcoal, and factories to foster mutually beneficial business relationships with local communities in Chayaburi and Bokeo provinces. He also facilitates and coordinates with the provincial and district forestry and agriculture office. Chai has worked for more than 7 years on timber trade. Recently, he has built partnerships between the private sector and local farmers to improve trust to better implement the village forest management plan, fire prevention strategies, and also solving village boundary conflicts and promoting production-driven forest landscape restoration. So over to you, Chai, to talk to us about community forestry in Lao PDR.
Yes, thank you, Natalie. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I would like to speak on the land use and also village forestries, as well as a partnership with local community and private sectors. I think before we go to the partnership agreement to develop any market-driven FLR, the first thing that we need to consider is land use planning. That, as you may know, in many countries, that local community, they have only customary land use, that they don't have a fully right on the land as well as the forest. In the meanwhile, that the conflict is also ongoing between neighboring villages, and as well as they cannot control the local community in their own villages, and others investments may come. That our project also focus on land use planning. We call participatory land use planning. That means we bring all stakeholders, governments, and CSO, local community to develop the land use plannings and approved by local authorities. That is also really a strategy for the government, national government as well. To achieve the FLR, we need to also to do a village forest management plan, because after we zoning the forest, the building land, industry lands, as well as other type of land, and then we may concern to focus on the village forest, that where we protect it, where we do the conservation to keep a biodiversity, where we want to restore the forest. That is also includes the agriculture land. Yeah. For village forest management plan, that is include a lot of activity that local community can involve, that fire protection and watershed protection, and so on. Yeah. And it's not only to ask the community to protect their rights and their land and their forests, to use the forest, to use the timber. It may not enough because local community, they also need some incentive from that forest. That's why we also try to bring other intervention as working with private sectors on the planted timber, and as well as NTFP that we can design on agroforestries. And in many years ago that we also have achieved a lot of company also want to work with us and sign the partnership agreement on NTFP, charcoal, and as well as the timber. Yeah, this is, we cannot forget on the economics, because the local community, they still need income to survive and to send the children to schools, etc. Yeah, this is, I really summarize on the experience that we have done so far. And this is might be an innovative way that we could do together with NGO, government, and CSO, yeah, as well as private sectors. All these actors is really important that we cannot miss anyone here, yeah, because everyone needs to work together. Otherwise, only community also cannot handle any challenges that's coming by investments, and as well as they also cannot dealing with other instructions or other law and policy is coming. Yeah, they also need to be aware to get all information. Yeah, that's all for my presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chai. So I think there's a few points, few key takeaways from what you were presenting, but putting the local communities in at the center of forest management through village forestry in Lao, and also the way that you've been helping in developing partnerships together between communities and the private sector, and also from the work that you're carrying out that I know about, engaging with local and national governments on that as well. So I think we've had a very interesting set of presentations. I'd like to thank again our panelists for intervening. All of your presentations touched upon the use of tools, methods, or a model or system that can support local communities and indigenous people to have access, to have rights and opportunities from forest resources, while at the same time ensuring that forest restoration and the preservation of important, diverse and fragile ecosystems are also served. Those interests are also served, which, as we know, is of critical importance, has been, and more than ever is very urgent. So we've heard about community forestry, village forestry in Laos, agro-silvo fisheries in Indonesia, the use of the global biodiversity framework in the Mayombo region, and a few other solutions. So I'd like to now ask you, after having heard about your individual research and perspective, maybe one question to all of you, if you can make your responses concise, because unfortunately we are also running a little bit after time. But I'd love to hear from you a concrete solution. So what is the brightest solution that you have encountered across all of those landscapes, especially these fragile landscapes, for building strong and productive partnerships with indigenous people and local communities in forest management? So I will take answers from the panel here, and we have Grace online as well. Maybe I can start from my left. So Hye Soon, if you would like to share your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Natalie. For our project, farmers having optimistic perspective on our agro-silvo fishery will be one bright solution we have. And we have maintained strong partnership with C4 in Indonesia, and that we have a colleague sent there to support, to advocate our perspectives and cooperate with C4 that they can actually build up strong partnership with the local community in the area. And C4 also has built up strong network with the local communities, so, and done enough research project to have trust for each other, and I think that's one partnership we have so far.
Great, thank you very much, Hae-Yoon. So building trust and also the partnership that you have with C4 has been instrumental in ensuring those solutions. Could I ask Chai?
Yes. I think the main thing that is quite a long journey for we talking about the partnership. But we need to bring everyone's in the journey from beginning to the end, because along the ways that in many issues that each stakeholders also need to solve as well, and some issue is also they also cannot do it by themselves. They also need help from others. Yeah, this is also the important point. But it's not only that, but it's also to build a relationship, yeah, and trust. And as Yoon mentioned, we cannot miss on that. And trust, transparency, and everyone's on the same page. And if everyone's trust each other, that means any issue they also can solve, yeah, and can be a sustainability. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chai. Mark, could I ask you the same question? So what's the brightest solution you've encountered on your end to support these partnerships with local communities?
Thank you so much for the question. I think that's the billion-dollar question out there, right? And I fully agree with the two previous speakers. I think excellent points. I think building on trust and access to fair and true information at all times is crucial. I think we have the science out there, we have the knowledge, we have the experiences of what works less well. And I think maybe one example to share here that I think is an interesting one is in Costa Rica, where the national PEST program that has been running for several many years now recently was let's say, further opened up to have one window focusing in particular on indigenous people, which I think is a very interesting opportunity for other, scalable options elsewhere. Basically, where Costa Rica received some REDD+ results-based payments that were then reinvested into the national PEST program, with part of that focusing on this new window to expand the PEST program for, in particular, IPs, to then reinvest in their local communities while really protecting and conserving the forest. So I think that's an interesting model to mention in this regard. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mark, for mentioning also a concrete example. And yeah, I think Costa Rica has a lot to offer in that regard. Could I ask Grace online to also give us your thoughts, your perspective of one of these bright solutions that we might want to use to roll out as an example?
Right, thank you. I guess, from a research or academic point of view, solutions are kind of a tough way to frame this, because I guess there are always different models and different ways of working with different communities around the world. But I think what many of our other speakers have touched upon are like some core principles, so principles of trust, principles of transparency of information and knowledge and so on. And I think from our side, we want to highlight what it means to bring local communities into a knowledge co-production stage. So how do we bring communities' knowledge systems and values towards a decision-making stage, not only at the national level, but also at the global scale, which we have seen in some cases with like perhaps with like IPBES and other types of global forums. So I think these kinds of principles of how we work with local communities to kind of co-produce knowledge around what it means for governance and what it means for their visions of sustainable development will be key as part of moving forward in terms of a more equitable relationship.
Great, thank you, Grace, for your perspective and for opening up the perspective as well by also thinking about how in decision making we can also look at how the co-production of knowledge can be brought to different levels, including the global level. I'd like to ask the same question to David Gans as well. David?
Yeah, so in my opening remarks, I mentioned the new arena of jurisdictional level approaches, and I'm very encouraged both in terms of the traditional REDD+ space, but also in terms of the voluntary carbon markets. There's the LEAF Coalition, which is a consortium of traditional ODA type donors with private sector actors that are looking to finance jurisdictional level approaches in different parts of the world that could certainly help to unlock carbon finance and create new partnerships with indigenous peoples and local communities. And similarly, there is recently announced in Glasgow the People's Forest Partnership, which is also a consortium-based approach with private sector actors, mostly carbon project developer firms and NGOs such as RECOF and Forest Trends that are really looking to unlock the power of climate finance and conservation finance to get more resources to the ground level and ultimately have benefit sharing mechanisms that truly provide local communities with the right incentives to stop deforestation or at least alleviate the degradation forces that you all recognized in the Mentimeter as being very important in your specific region. So I'm very encouraged by these trends and the signs that ultimately the global community is putting some money into the right conduits. Let's hopefully see the money start to flow down to the ground level where we can incentivize more and more action in the right direction. So I'm very encouraged by that. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you, David, and I think that's also a good point, one that was we didn't touch upon earlier, looking at climate finance and how to get some of these commitments that have been made at the last COP drilled down to the local level, also by ensuring that the appropriate standards are in place for local communities and indigenous people to benefit from these financing mechanisms. Okay, I see that we have a few minutes before we need to close our session, and I would really like to hear from you, from the audience here. I'd like to know if you have a question to ask to our panelists. So there are a couple of microphones in, that should be in the center alleys over here. Do we have questions from the floor? Could I see a show of hands? Oh, someone is going to the mic. Yes, please introduce yourself, and if you can direct the question to one of our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. My name is Afsana, and I'm a forestry graduate from Nepal. So my question is to David or to any of the panelists who would want to take it. So we talk about building trust to indigenous communities in managing forest, but now I'm working in Canada and I see that it has a history of using the indigenous knowledge and trust against them. So the indigenous communities are really reluctant to trust the forest stakeholders or anyone who want to partnership. So what could be the approach of us communicating or, you know, like reaching out to them to rebuild that kind of trust for a collaborative partnership with indigenous communities?
Thank you. I think the first suggestion is try not to lose that trust in the first place, because once you lose it, it's very hard to regain it. But ultimately, if it's government or private sector that has broken that trust, I believe that for different parts of the world, civil society organizations are extremely important to broker that trust between, I call it the tripartite, between government, private sector, and obviously indigenous peoples and local communities that ultimately need to have a stronger voice. With trust building, it takes a long time, and we've been working at this for 35 years in this region, the Asia-Pacific region. And ultimately, with trust building comes also, I think, the ability to be a neutral broker. And as an international non-government organization, we work on that trust building. But it's extremely important to build it as the communities want it built, and incentivize them to really have a stronger voice in the way that they want to have a voice, not in the way that we perceive it to be important from a global community. So in terms of the indigenous peoples in Canada, ultimately, if that trust is broken, you have to start with multi-stakeholder dialogues with all of the people that first broke the trust and those that are feeling disenfranchised, and start with a very, very common approach to build, let's just say, a common vision of where the forest needs to go from an indigenous standpoint, but also in terms of what the government is and private sector is looking for from the very same resource base. I think ultimately in parts of the world where indigenous peoples do have land tenure, it's more important for them to have a strong voice, because they ultimately can take on the tenure rights and move forward. In other parts of the world where we're basically negotiating on behalf of local communities, indigenous peoples, to get the customary tenure recognized and move towards secure land tenure rights. So ultimately, I think it's different in different parts of the world, but it's very important not to lose the trust in the very beginning.
Thank you, David, for your comprehensive answer. I think that's a sensitive and an important question to be asked, in fact. Could I see if anybody else from the audience has a question? Yes, I see. Please, a lady at the back, if you can introduce yourself. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pirawan. I'm the current Indigenous group from Thailand, and I'm working with Asia Indigenous People Pact. Just would like to contribute, not really to ask the question, but one important approach. We need the human rights-based approach to build this strong partnership. And to see us indigenous people, we are not like stakeholder, and we are the rights holder. So seeing us equally, respecting us, our rights, we have the collective rights over land, territory, and resources. And our knowledge is equally important as scientists. So putting us in the center of decision making, recognize our land rights, that will be very crucial, no? And that going to help us to really have a genuine partnership with every stakeholder. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And I think, yes, that's very critical, using a human rights-based approach and recognizing, securing the rights of indigenous people and local communities over land and resources. And we've started to touch upon some issues around customary land tenure, and how communities can have those rights being recognized in the first place. We would need much more time to uncover and unpack those issues that are quite complex and very important. But I'd like to thank our panelists for intervening today, and I think this will be the closing of our panel session. We'll pass on the stage, the mic, back to David for his closing remarks. But thanks very much for your interactive interventions as well.
Yes, thank you very much to the panelists, to the audiences, both those online and those here in the room in Seoul. And a big thank you to Natalie for her moderation facilitation role. She did not sign up for this. A few weeks ago, we had some changes in the plan, so I really am appreciative for Natalie stepping up. It was very nice to hear in the closing some take-home messages from all of you, and I also greatly appreciate the comments from Nepal and from Thailand on taking on a human rights-based approach and the importance of trust building in this sector. This session is all about partnership, and we know that those partnerships are not only very important to build, but they are also very fragile, and we need to cultivate them, maintain them. Once they are broken, it's very hard to rebuild the trust. So ultimately, like I said earlier, it's best to cultivate them from the very beginning. This is something from an FPIC standpoint, making sure that if you're designing projects, or in the case of Grace Wong, if you're designing research, to make sure that you're doing so in a very participatory fashion. We're looking for action, but we want to make sure that action is also very culturally appropriate and sensitive to the local needs of people on the ground. So it's with that I say thank you to our co-hosts, to Arcos and to Easymode. My apologies to Sam and our Arcos colleagues that we did not get to the video. And certainly our appreciation to FAO and the World Forest Congress organizers, and to the host country, to this wonderful place called South Korea that has been hosting us for the last few days. And those that are joining us online, you missed an opportunity to really see a wonderful part of the world, and we hope you will come here to South Korea to enjoy the food, the culture, the dance, and the song. So thank you to the host country for this wonderful experience. With that, I say thank you very much and have a nice afternoon, evening, or morning from wherever you are in the world. Thank you.